All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about multiple wives and, how to approach this topic. Because I think a lot of people, especially today, don't know how to really approach this topic, you know? And this is a kind of like my answer um, about it and how to think about it and, how to respond if a woman tells you about this. Because, what if you get in like a marriage meeting with a wife and, she asks you like, will you seek multiple wives? How do you answer? What's the best way to answer that? You know what I mean? Because technically it's permissible, right? But it's you have to like basically respond in a way that doesn't that doesn't reject Allah's will, but doesn't make the woman feel saddened by it. You know what I mean? And I think that's like the right balance, because I think a lot of men don't know how to, like, most men just don't understand women, period, right? Because they just think logically. They think, oh, like having multiple wives is permissible. So like, I just gotta tell my wife, like, if I get a second one, like, oh no, but Allah willed it. Oh, but Allah says it's permissible. But like, the woman isn't going to really like respond well to that. And the reason why is because women don't think logically; they think emotionally. So like, she feels jealous, and and the husband here is like, but like it's permissible, so how else, like, bro, you know what I mean? It's not. That's kind of a. This is why like most men that enter into polygynous relationships, which is basically like having multiple wives, it always ends in divorce with the first wife. And the reason why is because the husband just doesn't have enough wisdom. That's the reason. Doesn't have enough wisdom. What do I mean? The husband doesn't know what to do when the wife has emotions, and then when the wife because she's clearly like suffering, right? And a lot of women that have, a husband that, may have another wife, they're always battling with jealousy, right? And you have to be the type of man to kind of like validate her on that. A lot of men kind of ignore that about their wives, but you have to be able to open and hear her fully express her jealousy. And, that's why like you need to bring this up to your wife with the first one. If you were to get a second wife, like you would have to bring this up to the first wife to tell her like, hey, like you're not saying anything, but I thought I would bring this up to you, because like obviously all the wives are going to be jealous, okay? Like that's just a natural thing. Like we shouldn't really like look down on that, and we shouldn't really like just say like, oh, Allah, it's permissible, because saying it's permissible to the first wife is not going to resolve her emotions. What's going to resolve her emotions is her being fully heard, right? And I think that's what a lot of men don't do. Like they don't hear their wife's emotions. You have to be able to hear and validate it. It's not about just like hearing it. You have to also like understand it and validate her emotions. She just wants to be heard, right? Women don't want to be logically argued with. Okay, like you can't tell your first wife, hey, look, like it's permissible to have multiple wives, okay? And then just like have her accept it, because it's very hard a woman to accept that logically until she feels emotionally safe, right? So that's where a lot of men go wrong. They just don't have enough wisdom to be able to spontaneously react in a way that doesn't involve ego, right? And is able to bring the first wife, be able to make her feel safe, right? And I think that's basically the thing about it is, it's not that having multiple wives is wrong. It's just that like, are you the type of man that can actually do it, right? And most men just don't have wisdom, right? And that's why they can't do it, because when a woman tries to argue, or maybe she may say something that's disrespectful, the men tends to respond with ego, argues back. But you have to tell them like, look, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to understand you, okay? And that's the reality. Like you have to understand your wife's emotions, okay? You don't need to convince her like, look, this is permissible in Islam. You just have to tell her like, look, this is something that's like, I understand that you're kind of like feeling a certain way, and I want to be there for you. You know what I mean? And I think that's where a lot of men go wrong. Is the woman basically has all these pent up emotions, right? And she's like accumulating over like and she kind of builds a resentment. Because like she can't fully express her jealousy to her husband, because like her husband's gonna like say, oh well, you have to accept it because it's permissible, right? But that's not a man with wisdom. because a man with wisdom wouldn't respond like that. Wouldn't respond like that. That's the difference between the prophets and righteous men. Because it's not enough to be righteous. You know what I mean? Because you can be a righteous man, but not have wisdom and react in this way. You know what I mean? You can be a pious man and you will still not be able to handle multiple women because you don't know how to spontaneously judge and react in a way that's going to satisfy her needs, right? A lot of men just resort to logical interpretation, right? They say, oh, but it's Allah said it, but you have to keep in mind that you kind of have to approach this with wisdom. So if you're to get in a marriage meeting and you're to tell her look, and she was to tell you are you going to get multiple wives? Your answer should be, well, I don't do what I do. I do what Allah wills. I don't decide to have multiple wives. Allah decides. I don't decide to have one wife. Allah decides. Everything I do in my life, it's not because of me. It's because of Allah. So, that's the type of answer you have to give. I don't decide what I do in my life. I do what Allah wills for me. All right? And if Allah willed for me to have more than one wife, then it's going to happen no matter what. Even if I actively reject it, it's going to happen. And if Allah willed for me to have one wife, no matter how much I try to search for a new wife, it's never going to happen. Why? Because Allah didn't will it. And it's that simple. People think that they have control of their wives. Think they have control of their lives. And that's the illusion. You think that you can control your life. You think you can just decide to have multiple wives. But here's the reality. Allah decides everything about your life. So that's the type of answer. That's the best way to respond. And with this question, it's I will never seek multiple wives because I'm not the one seeking it. Allah is going to decide that for me or not. If Allah decides it's going to be good for me to have multiple wives, then I'm going to have multiple wives because Allah willed it and Allah sees that I can actually do it justly. Or if Allah sees in me look, I probably won't be able to handle it well, then I'm only going to get one. Okay? You really have to approach it from that mindset because Allah decides everything about you and Allah knows whether something's good for you or not. Okay? So, I will never seek anything. Allah will seek it through me if He wills. Okay? So that's the difference, So Allah will usually place things in front of you that are going to be pretty much undeniable and it's just going to happen anyway because Allah willed it. So, and you have to think about the Prophet, peace be upon him, he had 9 wives, right? Now, he was he's basically the greatest human of all time, right? But you have to keep in mind that he's the only man in history, ever in existence, to have justly handled 9 wives. There's been kings in history that had hundreds of wives, right? But none of those kings handled them with just or mercy or none of them were able to equally give them emotional, spiritual, physical, satisfaction across everything, right? But the Prophet was one of the few guys in history that was able to justly handle multiple wives. And the reason why he was able to do this was because he had wisdom. It wasn't just because he was righteous or pious, it was also because he had wisdom, because he was able to see the needs of women. When a woman kind of said something disrespectful, when Aisha broke the plate, you know what the Prophet, peace be upon him, responded? The Prophet didn't get mad at Aisha for breaking the plate because Aisha was jealous. She broke the plate, and the Prophet responded with mercy and wisdom because he sees through the illusion. Most men, when they see their wife break their plates, the husband will be like, why you break the plate? What are you doing? You know what I mean? That's not the way to respond. Because obviously there's something that triggered the action. When you have wisdom, you see the essence of everything in the universe, including the essence of your wife's emotions. So when you see your wife break a plate, when you see Aisha break a plate, you see the essence of it. What's the essence? Well, there's something that's driving the behavior. What is that essence? Oh, the emotions. What is she feeling right now? So then you approach her with understanding her emotions, not arguing against her. You don't argue, why did you do this? You argue, what makes you feel this way? Because the Prophet knew that she was feeling a certain way and that drove her to do the action. Most men focus on the external action and don't look at the internal state. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge allows you to see the external actions, but it doesn't allow you to perceive the unseen realities of this universe and the unseen realities of your wife's emotions. That's what the Prophet did. The Prophet was able to do this because he had wisdom. And wisdom can only be granted by God, by Allah. And that's what he was able to do. He basically approached her with mercy and wisdom. she was a little jealous. She reacted like, she broke a plate, whatever. But obviously, like, he knew what to do because he was able to perceive beyond the words, right? He knew that she was asking for safety, assurance, and basically safety, assurance, and feeling heard, right? Like validation, right, of her own emotions. Like, I think like women need to really feel like they're validated, like their emotions, because I think that's what women really want, guys. You know what I mean? Like, if a woman could be with a man that hears everything about her emotions and that she can fully express her emotions, whether it's jealousy, anger, frustration, and a man can like be there to hear her, that is like the number one thing a woman really desires. Like, a woman doesn't really desire a guy with money, like even like someone who's like generally handsome, or like status. Like, none of that matters. That's why the Prophet was like a giga chad. One of the greatest humans of all time was because he was able to give women that no other king in history was able to give women, and that's complete understanding, making them feel heard, right? Because there's been kings in history that had wives, but not all the wives were able to feel heard, right, and understood by their man. But the Prophet was one of the few guys in history that was able to actually achieve this. And it had to do with wisdom. It had nothing to do with status, nothing to do with money, nothing to do with looks, nothing to do with knowledge. It had everything to do with wisdom, because wisdom allows you to perceive everything. It allows you to perceive the unknown. It allows you to perceive the essence. So that's why, if you want to really have multiple wives, first of all, you don't decide, Allah decides. Second, you need to have wisdom. And wisdom is granted by Allah. Because there's a lot of scholars, right, in history, like, there's a lot of scholars in Islam that have knowledge, but they still don't get multiple wives. Why? Because they don't have wisdom. They know they can't handle it. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of scholars in Islam today that, like, don't get multiple wives just because, like, they know they wouldn't be able to really understand or be able to handle multiple wives. There's been, you know what I mean? They know they wouldn't be able to handle it. And it's not really their fault. It's just because they don't have wisdom. You know what I mean? Because they can't perceive the essence of behavior. Most people look at the external behavior, but a guy with wisdom sees the internal state of humans, right? And that's what made the Prophet a lot different, very different than the men with just knowledge. That's why I say it's not enough to be righteous. You have to have wisdom to be able to handle multiple wives like this. Imam Ali, he's one of the companions of the Prophet, the Sahabas, and Umar. These were the two Sahabas that were able to have 4 wives simultaneously. The only ones, the only non-prophets. Obviously, the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, he had like 9 wives, right? But Ali and Umar, they had 4 wives simultaneously, right? Well, at first, like, Ali married Fatima, and he was monogamous to her for a while, and then he married multiple wives after she passed away. But these guys were able to handle multiple wives because they had ilham. Ilham is a form of divine inspiration. It's wisdom. It's like the most complete form of wisdom you can possibly get from Allah. And when you have this, guess what? You see everything. You see the universe. You see the entire structure of the universe, which means that you can actually see the entire structure of your wife's emotions. See, like, when your wife is arguing, or like, let's say like she does something like, breaks plates, or she says something disrespectful to you, the first reaction of a man is to respond with ego, right? But a man with wisdom, right, would perceive the essence of the emotions, right? And be able to understand, okay, so what's actually making her react like this is this. She feels a certain way, and she's frustrated about something about her emotions, of something about like the emotions she feels frustrated about. I need to learn. I need to make her feel heard. I need to understand what's going on here, and that's the best way to approach it. But most men just won't be able to do this because it's like you can't just you don't have time to just look at a textbook. It's like, oh, okay, she breaks a plate. Okay, what did the Prophet do when their wives broke a plate? And they look at the textbook, and you're like, yo, like, you don't have time. Because this is why knowledge is not enough. Knowledge is not enough because you could have knowledge, but you could be out here trying to look at the textbook, like, yo, what should I do when my wife's like, acting like this, right? But knowledge won't be enough because wisdom is spontaneous judgment. It's spontaneous. Like, you have to act right on the spot. Like, when it gets heated up, right, you got to know how to react on the spot without ego. And that requires not knowledge, but wisdom. Because you got to kill the ego, first of all. You got to silence it. Because usually when someone disrespects you, usually people respond out of ego, right? Especially when the husband, is supposed to be the leader of the household, and the husband expects to be obeyed in a sense, right? But you can't do that, you know what I mean? You have to like kind of understand your wife's emotions in that way. And the best way to do that is be able to respond in the correct way. And that only requires wisdom. And that can only be granted by Allah. It can't be acquired through effort or intellect. So that's why Ali, Umar, and the Prophet, peace be upon all of them, that's the reason why they were able to handle multiple wives. So having multiple wives is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like, are you the type of man that can handle it? So that's the thing, guys. And actually, if you do it correctly, it actually becomes an act of service. It's not because of ego. You know what I mean? Usually, like, most people think that having multiple wives is like a purely desire-based thing, but it's not really a desire-based thing. It's a service-based thing. It's not for men. It's actually for more for women. Like, if one man could only marry one woman, then there'll be a lot of widows out there that would never be able to get married again. You know what I mean? So like, it's mainly to help and provide and protect the woman out there, not necessarily to fulfill the desires of the man. Because like, if you're in Islam, you're not supposed to act based off desire. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to act based on Allah's will. Okay? That's the difference. Like, people think like when the Prophet had like 9 wives, he was acting based off of desire. Not necessarily. He was acting based on Allah's will. Allah willed him to have 9 wives. So he had 9 wives. Okay? Like you can't fight like what Allah wrote. Okay? So that's the thing, guys. So it's a service-based thing. Like, you're giving, you're not taking. Like, when you marry another woman, you're giving more. You know what I mean? You're not taking anything from the woman. You know what I mean? You're actually giving a lot of things to her. You're providing her with safety, physical protection, financial like stability, right? You're providing a lot of things. You know what I mean? So it's actually more in service to the women, not the men. You know what I mean? When it comes to having multiple wives. So that's just, people need to understand. It's like, like, we're not reacting based off of, desire. It's based off of service. We're trying to serve. You know what I mean? But obviously, if you want to be able to serve like that, you got to be able to do it in a way that's not going to end in divorce, right? And what you need is wisdom. So Allah will only know if you can actually handle multiple wives, and He won't be able to. So that's the thing, guys. But a lot of men that try to do polygyny, a lot of it fails. Mainly just because, like I said, they don't have the wisdom to be able to perceive the essence of behavior. They just look at the external actions and don't know how to react. But wisdom is the ability to perceive the essence of, everything, the universe, a person's emotions, everything. So you're able to see the core root of the cause of certain behaviors, and you're able to sort of know what to do instantly. You're able to know what your wife needs instantly, and that's what wisdom does. And when you have this, you can be able to handle multiple wives, right? But at the end of the day, like, it's not really something that you decide. You don't get to decide these things. Allah decides these things. I mean, like, just think about it. Like, if the Prophet, if there's a woman, like, that decided to marry the Prophet, like imagine the Prophet was alive today, and a woman came up to him, and she was going to marry him, right? But she said to him, only marry me. Imagine if you're like in front of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and you're a woman, and you tell him, only marry me. How is he going to respond? Like, he's not, you know what I mean? Like, he's not here to obey, like, what you say. He's here to obey Allah. If Allah willed him to have more wives, then he has to obey that. You know what I mean? So the Prophet wouldn't have accepted that. Not because out of desire, but because, like, he's doing it based off Allah's will. And that's how you should always be responding. You should always be responding based on Allah's will. And here's the thing. You don't know what Allah wills. Like, you can't say the future. Like, I don't know, like, if I'm going to have, like, multiple wives or one wife, right? I don't know. Like, no one knows, because no one can see the future necessarily, right? Not in that sense, right? So you just have to tell them, like, look, I don't know, but I'm going to do what Allah wills. And if Allah wills you to be my only wife, then that's what Allah wills. But if Allah wills me to have more, then I'm going to have to submit to that. But not for ego, not for service. I mean, not for desire, but so I can serve more of the ummah and do it justly. You know what I mean? So it's not, that's the thing, guys. It's like people just respond based off what they get to decide and based off their desires, but that's not what it is, guys. Everything we do is aligned with Allah's will, and it's aligned, it's supposed to be with service. That's the intention. We're supposed to serve multiple women. We're not supposed to take from multiple women. We're supposed to serve them. That's the essence of having multiple women and treating them justly. Like I said, because women just want to be heard. Okay? But most men don't do this. Why? Because they just respond out of ego, or they just say, oh, because Allah willed it, it's permissible. That's the only excuse people give. Like, you can't tell your wife, hey, look, it's permissible. End the story. Like, you can't really do that. Because the woman is still going to have pent-up emotions that are unresolved. You have to resolve those emotions. How do you do that? You don't do that by saying polygyny is permissible. You say that by telling her, how do you feel? What makes you feel this way? And you let her fully express her emotions, and you let her feel fully understood, right? And usually, once you're able to comfort her with that, and she feels understood by her man, then she won't actually mind staying. Like, she'll act, like, you know what I mean? Like, most of the time, like, that's what women really want. They just want to feel heard. You know what I mean? Like most women are never even heard with one guy. You know what I mean? Like, most guys can't even do this with one of their wives. But this is what you need to do with multiple wives if you were to have multiple, right? That's what you need to do. You just need to understand like the essence behind things. But like obviously like that's why like polygyny is not really popular in Islam. It's not because like it's allowed, but it's not really like normal. And the reason is because most men can't handle it, right? Because most men don't know what to do. Why? Because most men don't have wisdom. It has nothing to do with being pious. It has nothing to do with how knowledgeable you are in Islam. There's a lot of scholars in Islam that can't handle multiple wives. Why? Because they don't have wisdom. And wisdom can only be granted by Allah. Because wisdom allows you to see the essence of behind things, but knowledge can only give you, like, a lot. Like, if you're an Islamic scholar, you know a lot. You have a lot of knowledge, but you don't have hikmah. Hikmah, right? Hikmah is direct insight, So that's the difference. But that's like my response with the whole like multiple wives things. You know what I mean? You have to approach it with mercy and wisdom. It's not supposed to be for desire, guys. It's supposed to be for service and service of the ummah, service of, So but you have to keep in mind that like, you have to be the type of man to be able to do it. You know what I mean? And that's why it's not really common, because most men can't really do it. That's the thing. So that's like my like stance on it. You know what I mean? It's the most aligned with Allah. Like when we think about like how do we approach something, we have to approach it with the mindset of, okay, what does Allah say about this? Like what is it aligned with Allah's will? Because as a Muslim, we're supposed to submit to Allah's will. So let's say I want to have one wife, but like Allah willed for me to have multiple. I have to submit to Allah's will. You know what I mean? Because He willed it. You know what I mean? Like that's what the Prophet could never guarantee, like only one wife, because it's like, well, he had to do what Allah willed. And if Allah willed for him to have more in the future, then like he can't really reject that. He has to align with that. You know what I mean? So but obviously like the Prophet was able to do it because he had wisdom. So like he's able to do it justly. But if he can't do it justly, then you just have one, and that's fine. You know what I mean? But you have to approach it from this, because like the Prophet, peace be upon him, like he was able to make one. He was able to make 9 women, right, more full ever than like what one woman could have with one husband. You know what I mean? Like most husbands, like they won't be able to make their wife feel as full, even though like that's their only wife, when the Prophet was able to make the other 9 women like way more full than ever. And that's just because like that's just what wisdom does. You know what I mean? It allows you to see the essence behind things. It allows you to kind of resolve conflicts. Like, I don't argue with people. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, guys. The Prophet, peace be upon him, like, he never argued with anyone. He just understood them. That's what wisdom allows you to do. Wisdom allows you to understand people, not argue with people. He wasn't convincing, he was awakening, right? And that's the difference. Like, we're not here to argue with people. We're here to understand people. You know what I mean? But the ego gets in the way. The ego gets in the way. Like, oh, no, but I want to convince. I want to argue back. This girl said something bad to me. So that's the thing, guys. You have to respond with mercy and wisdom. And I think that's like the best way to kind of approach this topic. So it could be a good thing, multiple wives, if you do it justly. But you have to do it justly, right? And you have to know what you're doing too. Like, you know what I mean? And you have to spontaneously react. And that requires wisdom. right? Which can only be granted by Allah. So that's the thing. But that's the reason why, like that's like the topic, right? So that's why like multiple wives is permissible in Islam, and that's why like it hasn't been done by many people, at least like and that's just because of what I just said. Most Muslim men don't have wisdom, and and Allah made it permissible just for those guys that actually were able to do it, like the Prophet, Ali, Umar, right? But so that's the thing, guys. But that's basically what you have to do. Like you have to just align with Allah's will, and that's it. Like there's no you in the equation. You know what I mean? Like you don't decide these things, guys. You know what I mean? You align with Allah's will, and once you align with Allah's will, then Allah will do everything for you, and that's pretty much it.